She thought her baby shower would be the happiest day of her life, until the mistress showed up. The other woman walked in smiling, pregnant, claiming it was his baby too. The room froze. The husband panicked. And then, Grandma stood up. She handed over a gift box and said, "Open it, right now." What was inside that gift left everyone speechless, especially the mistress. You won't believe what Grandma had planned. Stay till the end. This one has a twist you'll never forget. And hey, if you love stories where karma hits hard, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more real-life drama that'll blow your mind. I was 8 months pregnant when my husband's mistress crashed my baby shower. She came to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved. But what she didn't know was that my grandmother had already prepared her gift, and it left all of us speechless. My name is Emma Carter, and this is the story of how one afternoon destroyed my life and saved it at the same time. The morning started like something out of a Southern Living magazine. Our historic home in Charleston glowed in the late August sunlight, the garden already filled with white folding chairs and tables draped in pale blue linens. My best friend Sarah had spent the past week transforming our backyard into something magical. Tiny lights were strung through the oak trees, and mason jars filled with fresh peonies sat on every surface. I stood at the bedroom window, one hand resting on my swollen belly, watching the caterers arrange silver trays of finger sandwiches and petit fours. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. David came up behind me, his reflection appearing in the window beside mine. At 37, my husband was still the handsome man I'd married 7 years ago. Dark hair just starting to gray at the temples, strong jawline, the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. He'd built a successful real estate development company from nothing, or so everyone believed. "Nervous about today?" he asked, kissing my temple. I forced a smile. "Just tired. The baby kept me up all night kicking." "Our little girl's going to be a fighter, just like her mom." He squeezed my shoulder. "I have to run to a job site this morning. Emergency with the permits on the Harbor Street project. I'll be back before the party starts." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Today? It's Saturday, David. The shower starts at 2. "I know, baby. I'm sorry. It'll be quick. I promise. 2 hours max." He was already grabbing his keys, his phone, his watch, moving fast like he always did when he was lying. I wouldn't go if it wasn't important. I'd heard that line so many times. The late nights at the office, the weekend trips for site inspections, the conferences that ran long. Always important, always necessary, always alone. "Okay," I said quietly. He paused at the door. "You look beautiful, by the way. That dress is perfect." After he left, I stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. The pale blue sundress I'd chosen suddenly felt too tight, too cheerful, too much like a costume. I was playing the role of happy, pregnant wife, while my instincts screamed that something was deeply, terribly wrong. A knock on the bedroom door made me turn. My grandmother, Patricia Montgomery, stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea. At 78, she was still sharp as a blade, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture impeccable. She'd been a federal prosecutor for 30 years before retiring, and she still had the same penetrating gaze that had made criminals confess on the witness stand. "He left," she said. It wasn't a question. "Job site emergency." Grandma Patty set the teacups on the dresser and walked to me, taking both my hands in hers. Her fingers were cool and strong. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully." "Grandma, please, not today. I can't." "Today is exactly when you need to hear this." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I've been watching David for a long time. I've seen the signs, the absences, the vagueness, the way he controls your finances." My chest tightened. "He doesn't control my finances. We have joint accounts. Joint accounts that he manages." "When was the last time you looked at the statements yourself?" I pulled my hands away. "This is ridiculous. David loves me. He's building a life for us." "Is he?" Patty's blue eyes held mine. "Or is he building something else entirely?" Before I could answer, Sarah's voice called up from downstairs. "Emma, the florist is here with a question about the centerpieces." Grandma Patty picked up a small wrapped box from the dresser. It was covered in navy blue paper tied with a simple silver ribbon. Nothing like the cheerful pastel packages already piling up on the gift table downstairs. "What's that?" I asked. "A gift. For David." She pressed it into my hands. "Keep it somewhere safe, and when the time comes, you'll know when to open it. Grandma, trust me, Emma. Just this once, trust that I know what I'm doing." She kissed my forehead. "Now go downstairs and greet your guests. Today is about celebrating your daughter. Whatever else happens, remember that." I took the box, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant somehow. Important. I tucked it into the back of my closet, behind my winter boots where no one would see it. By 1:30, the garden was filled with women I'd known my whole life. Cousins and college friends, ladies from my book club, colleagues from the art gallery where I worked. They laughed and sipped mimosas and played ridiculous games where they guessed the baby's weight and made predictions about when she'd arrive. I sat in a wicker chair Sarah had decorated with blue ribbons, opening presents and smiling until my face hurt. Tiny dresses and soft blankets and books about goodnight moons and hungry caterpillars. Each gift came with advice I pretended to want. Sleep when the baby sleeps. Don't worry about keeping the house perfect. The days are long, but the years are short. Grandma Patty sat in the corner, quiet and watchful. She'd positioned herself with a clear view of the garden gate like she was waiting for something. At 2:15, David still hadn't returned. At 2:30, I stopped checking my phone. At 2:45, the garden gate opened. The first thing I noticed was her dress. Pure white. Not cream or ivory or champagne, but wedding white. Funeral white. A color no one wore to a baby shower unless they were making a statement. The second thing I noticed was her confidence. She walked through that gate like she owned it, her heels clicking on the stone path, her chin high. She was younger than me, maybe 29 or 30. Dark hair in a sleek ponytail, expensive sunglasses, designer bag on her arm. The garden went quiet. Sarah, standing near the gift table, froze with a package in her hands. My cousin Rebecca stopped mid-sentence. Even the caterers paused, sensing the shift in energy. The woman lowered her sunglasses and her eyes found mine immediately. She smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Emma?" Her voice carried across the garden, sweet as poisoned honey. "I'm so sorry to crash your party. I'm Vanessa Blake, David's business partner." Business partner. David had never mentioned a business partner named Vanessa. I tried to stand, but my pregnant belly made it awkward. Sarah rushed over to help me up. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't think we've met." "No, we haven't. David keeps his work life very separate from his home life." Vanessa walked closer, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. "But I just couldn't miss this special occasion. A baby is such a blessing." Grandma Patty stood up from her corner chair. "Thank you for coming," I managed, even though every instinct told me to run. "Would you like some punch? We have—" Actually, I brought a gift. Vanessa held up a glossy bag with expensive boutique names printed on the side. "I picked it up in Cabo last month. You know, at that little shop on the marina, the one that sells the hand-embroidered baby clothes?" The garden tilted. Cabo. David had gone to Cabo 3 months ago. A guy's golf trip, he'd said. Just him and some clients. 4 days of business dinners and tea times. He'd come home with a poem and a story about almost getting a hole in one. "I've never been to Cabo," I whispered. "Oh." Vanessa's smile widened. "David didn't mention it. We had such a wonderful time there. The resort was beautiful. The sunset from our room was absolutely breathtaking." "Our room." Sarah's hand gripped my arm. "I think you should leave," she said, her voice hard. "Leave? But I just got here." Vanessa looked around at all the frozen faces staring at her. "Is something wrong? I thought everyone would be happy to meet me." After all, David and I have been working so closely together for 18 months. 18 months. The same amount of time I'd been begging David to spend more time at home. The same amount of time he'd been claiming the business needed him constantly. My grandmother moved through the garden like a shark through still water. She positioned herself between me and Vanessa, her small frame somehow imposing. "I don't believe you were invited to this shower," Patty said quietly. "You must be the famous Grandma Patty." Vanessa didn't flinch. David's told me so much about you. Retired prosecutor, right? Very impressive. And you're the woman who's been sleeping with my granddaughter's husband. Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped a plate. It shattered on the stone path. Vanessa's smile never wavered. Sleeping with? That's such a crude way to put it. David and I are in love. We have been for over a year, and honestly, she looked directly at me. I'm tired of being a secret. Emma deserves to know the truth. The truth, the word echoed in my head like a death knell. You're lying, I said, but my voice had no conviction. Deep down, in the place where instincts live, I already knew she was telling the truth. Am I? Vanessa reached into her designer bag and pulled out her phone. Would you like to see the photos? We have so many. Cabo, yes, but also Santa Fe. And that cabin in the mountains he told you was a solo fishing trip. And the hotel in Savannah during the architecture conference. She held up the phone. I could see the screen from where I stood. David's face, his arm around her. His smile genuine in a way it hadn't been with me in months. Years, maybe. Sarah tried to block my view. Don't look, Emma. Don't let her. But I'd already seen enough. The background of the photos, the dates, the intimacy captured in each shot. These weren't accidental. These were the pictures of a couple building a life together. Stop it, Grandma Patty said. Her voice cut through the chaos like a judge's gavel. Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends now. Game? Vanessa laughed. This isn't a game. This is me finally taking what's mine. Emma, you seem like a nice person. You really do. But let's be honest. Did you really think you were enough for him? You with your little art gallery job and your comfortable life? David needs someone ambitious. Someone who matches his drive. I couldn't breathe. The garden was spinning. All these people I loved were watching me fall apart in real time, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper meant for everyone to hear. He said you were cold, boring, that the pregnancy was a trap to keep him from leaving you. Someone started crying. I realized it was me. That's enough, Sarah shouted. She moved toward Vanessa like she might physically remove her. No, wait. I have one more thing to share. Vanessa reached into her bag again. This time she pulled out a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly, making sure everyone could see. It was an ultrasound photo. I'm pregnant, Vanessa announced to the silent garden. 12 weeks. David and I are having a baby. He's going to be a father to my child, Emma. Not yours, mine. The world went black at the edges. I felt Sarah's arms around me, holding me up. Heard my grandmother's voice giving sharp orders. Heard women gasping and talking, and some of them crying. But all I could see was that ultrasound photo. All I could think was that my husband was having a baby with another woman. And then I heard the garden gate open again. David stood there, his face white as chalk, his eyes moving from me to Vanessa and back again. Emma, he said, just my name. Like it explained everything. Like it fixed anything. David, Vanessa's voice was triumphant. I was just telling Emma our news. About the baby. About us. I think it's time we stopped hiding. Don't you? David looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. His mouth opened and closed. His hands made small, helpless gestures. For the first time in our 7-year marriage, I saw him completely unable to charm his way out of a situation. Vanessa, what are you doing here? His voice cracked. What am I doing here? I'm supporting you, darling. She walked toward him, her hips swaying. You said we were going to tell her after the baby was born. But I couldn't wait anymore. We love each other. Why should we hide? This isn't... David ran his hands through his hair. This isn't how we talked about doing this. The admission hung in the garden like smoke from a fire. He hadn't denied it, hadn't called her crazy or claimed she was lying. He'd admitted that they'd planned to tell me something, that there was something to tell. I felt my knees give way. Sarah and another friend caught me, helped me back into the wicker chair. My hands went automatically to my belly, protecting my daughter from the chaos, even though the chaos was everywhere, inescapable. David, tell them, Vanessa pressed. Tell everyone that you love me, that we're building a life together. Vanessa, please. Not like this. Not now. Then when? Her voice rose, and I saw something desperate flash across her face. This wasn't just cruelty. This was fear. She was afraid of losing him. You keep telling me to be patient, but I'm running out of patience. I'm carrying your child. Grandma Patty moved. She walked calmly to the gift table where presents were still piled high, picked up the navy blue box she'd given me that morning, and turned to face the garden. David, she said, her voice cutting through the hysteria like a knife through butter. I believe it's time to open my gift. Everyone turned to look at her. David shook his head. This really isn't the time, Patricia. On the contrary, I think it's the perfect time. She walked toward him, the box in her hands. I had this specially prepared for you. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you, and I can't imagine a more appropriate moment than right now. Something in her tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't a grandmother making polite conversation. This was a prosecutor about to present evidence. I don't want your gift, David said. Oh, I think you do. I think you need to see what's inside this box, in front of all these witnesses. Patty held it out to him. Open it, David, or I will. The garden had gone completely silent. Even Vanessa seemed uncertain now, sensing that something was shifting in the air. David took the box with shaking hands. Fine, if it'll make everyone happy. He untied the ribbon, pulled off the paper, opened the lid. His face went from white to gray. What is it? Vanessa demanded. She moved to look over his shoulder. Patty's voice rang clear. Layer 1 contains a legal document, specifically a revocable trust dissolution that I had drawn up 2 years ago. It explicitly states that David Carter has no legal claim to any Montgomery family assets, including the house you're standing in, the gallery where Emma works, and the trust fund her father left her. It's signed, notarized, and filed with the state. He knew about it. He signed it himself. Murmurs rippled through the guests. David's hands were shaking so hard the box nearly fell. I don't understand, Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Layer 2. Patty reached into the box and pulled out a stack of photographs. She didn't look at them. She handed them to Sarah. Please pass these around. Sarah looked at the first photo, her face hardened. She passed it to the next person, who gasped. Then the next. The photos made their way around the garden like a terrible game of hot potato. I couldn't see them from where I sat, but I could see the reactions. Shock, disgust, anger. What are those? I whispered. Photographs, Patty said calmly, of David with 4 different women over the past 2 years. Not just Vanessa. The dates and locations are on the back of each photo. They were taken by a private investigator I hired 18 months ago. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vanessa grabbed one of the photos as it passed by her. She stared at it. Her face went pale. Who is this? That would be Angela. She thought David was going to leave his wife for her, too. Patty's voice was merciless. The blonde is Christina, the redhead is Melissa, and I believe you've already met David's wife, Emma. That makes you number 5, dear. Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. You said I was special. You said in layer 3. Patty pulled out a sealed manila envelope. She walked directly to Vanessa and held it out. This is for you. Vanessa took it with trembling hands. What is this? Open it and see. Vanessa tore open the envelope. She pulled out official-looking documents with a seal at the top. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from her face completely. No, she whispered. This can't be right. Paternity test results, Patty announced to the Silent Garden, conducted 3 weeks ago using DNA samples obtained legally through your medical records. The child you're carrying is not David's. The garden erupted. Women gasped. Someone started crying. Sarah grabbed my hand and held it so tight it hurt. Vanessa's legs buckled. She caught herself on a table. How did you... I don't... According to the test, the biological father is Marcus Webb, your ex-boyfriend, I believe, the one you lived with until 4 months ago. Patty pulled another document from the box. I also have records showing that you've run this same con on 3 other men in the past 2 years, claiming pregnancy, demanding money, threatening exposure. It's a pattern. That's not true, Vanessa said, but her voice was hollow. Wire fraud, identity theft, attempted extortion. Patty's voice was relentless. You thought you could target my granddaughter's family because we have money. You thought David would be your ticket to the life you wanted, but you made one critical mistake. What mistake? Vanessa whispered. You came to a baby shower hosted by a retired federal prosecutor. Patty pulled out one final document. This is an arrest warrant, Mom. I filed it yesterday with the district attorney. You were wanted for fraud in 2 states. As if on cue, 2 men in plain clothes stepped through the garden gate. They'd been standing outside the whole time. Vanessa Blake? One of them said, pulling out a badge. Charleston Police Department, we have a warrant for your arrest. Vanessa's perfect composure shattered. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked from the officers to David to me to Grandma Patty. No words came out. She was speechless. Completely, utterly speechless. The officers approached her. You have the right to remain silent. As they read her rights and cuffed her hands, Vanessa found her voice. David, help me. Tell them this is wrong. Tell them. David stood frozen, the box still in his hands, photographs scattered at his feet. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the woman he had been sleeping with was led away in handcuffs. When Vanessa was gone, when the garden gate had closed behind the officers, everyone turned to look at David. Grandma Patty walked toward him slowly. You have 60 seconds to leave this property. Patricia, wait. I have documented evidence of embezzlement from Emma's trust fund, forged signatures on legal documents, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands where you've been hiding money for 3 years. The FBI is already building a case. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the garden. If you're still standing here in 60 seconds, I'll have you arrested too. And unlike Vanessa's charges, yours carry a minimum of 7 years in federal prison. David looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since he'd arrived. I saw him searching my face for something. Mercy, maybe, or forgiveness, or just a reason to stay and fight. But I had nothing left to give him. Emma, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. 55 seconds left. He turned and ran through the garden gate to his car and out of my life. The silence after he left was deafening. Then slowly someone started clapping. Sarah. Then another friend joined in. Then another. Until the entire garden was filled with applause. I sat in my wicker chair, 8 months pregnant, surrounded by shredded wrapping paper and overturned mimosas, and the remains of what was supposed to be a celebration. And I started to cry. Grandma Patty knelt beside me, her arms around me, and let me sob against her shoulder. You're safe now, baby girl, she whispered. You're safe. The guests left quietly. Sarah and my cousin Rebecca stayed to help clean up the disaster that had been my baby shower. They moved through the garden like ghosts, picking up shredded wrapping paper and forgotten presents, whispering to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. I sat in the living room numb while Grandma Patty made phone calls in the kitchen. I could hear fragments of her conversations. Yes, he's gone. No, she's not hurt. The baby's fine. We'll need to change the locks tonight. When the house was finally empty of everyone except Sarah, Rebecca, and Grandma Patty, I finally found my voice. How long have you known? Patty sat down beside me on the couch. I hired the private investigator 18 months ago. I started noticing irregularities in your trust fund statements. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. Money moving to accounts I didn't recognize. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Her voice was gentle. You loved him, Emma. You were building a life with him. If I'd come to you with suspicions but no proof, you would have taken his side. He would have convinced you I was paranoid, that I didn't trust him because of what happened with your grandfather. I'd almost forgotten. Grandma Patty's husband, my grandfather, had left her 40 years ago for a younger woman. The divorce had been brutal. He'd taken almost everything. I need to tell you something, Patty said. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Sarah and Rebecca quietly excused themselves, giving us privacy. When they were gone, Patty took my hands. When your grandfather left me, I was 40 years old. We'd been married 20 years. I thought we were happy. I thought I knew him. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. But I didn't know him at all. He'd been planning his exit for years, moving money, hiding assets, setting up a life with his mistress while I was home raising your mother. Grandma, by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. He'd taken everything. The house, the business, my reputation. I had to start over from nothing. Her fingers tightened on mine. I swore I would never let that happen to someone I loved again. Especially not you. So you've been protecting me. I've been giving you the tools to protect yourself. There's a difference. She stood up and walked to the mantel, where a stack of folders sat waiting. I didn't just expose David today, Emma. I gave you your life back. Everything he tried to take is still yours. The house, the gallery, your inheritance, all protected. I should have felt grateful. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. I'm 8 months pregnant with his child, I whispered. How am I supposed to do this alone? You're not alone. You have me. You have your friends. You have your mother. Patty sat back down beside me. And you have yourself. You're stronger than you know. That night, I lay in bed in a house that felt too big and too empty, one hand on my belly, feeling my daughter move inside me. She kicked hard, as if reminding me she was there. That no matter what her father had done, she was innocent, pure mine. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Emma, please, we need to talk. I can explain everything. I love you. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Please just give me a chance. I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me, the part that remembered 7 years of marriage, wanted to respond, wanted to believe that love was enough to fix betrayal this deep. But Grandma Patty's words echoed in my head. You're stronger than you know. I deleted the message and blocked the number. The next 3 days passed in a blur. My mother flew in from Atlanta. Friends called and texted and brought casseroles like I was in mourning. I suppose I was. Not mourning David, but mourning the life I thought I had. On the 4th day, David's lawyer called. Mrs. Carter, my name is Robert Henderson. I represent your husband. He'd like to discuss custody arrangements for when the baby is born. Custody arrangements. Like we were negotiating a business deal. He has no rights to my daughter, I said, my voice cold. Actually, under South Carolina law, as the biological father, tell David that if he wants to discuss custody, he can speak to my lawyer. The same lawyer who's currently reviewing evidence of his financial crimes. I hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. A different number. Emma, David's voice. Please don't hang up. I should have. I should have blocked this number too, but I needed to hear what he had to say, needed to understand how 7 years could end like this. What do you want, David? I want to explain. I want you to understand that Vanessa was lying about most of it. Yes, we had an affair. Yes, I made terrible mistakes, but I never planned to leave you. I love you. You have a funny way of showing love. I was weak. I was scared. I'm 37 years old and I thought this was all my life was ever going to be. I panicked. His voice cracked. But I never stopped loving you. You and the baby are my family. There was a time those words would have worked, a time when I would have forgiven him because I wanted so badly to believe our family could survive. The baby and I are a family, I said. You're just someone who used to live here. Emma, please. Grandma Patty showed me everything, David. The offshore accounts, the forged signatures. You've been stealing from me for 3 years. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. Silence on the other end. I'm filing for divorce, I continued. And if you fight me on custody, I'll make sure every shred of evidence of your crimes becomes public record. Your business will be destroyed. Your reputation will be destroyed. You'll spend years in federal prison. You wouldn't do that. Try me. I hung up and immediately called Grandma Patty. I need you to move forward with everything. The divorce, the criminal charges, all of it. Are you sure? Her voice was careful. Once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure. I want him gone. Then I'll make the calls. That night, I started having contractions. They were mild at first, just a tightening across my belly that came and went. But by midnight, they were coming every 10 minutes. Too early. The baby wasn't due for 3 more weeks. I called my mother, who drove me to the hospital. Grandma Patty met us there. The doctors examined me, hooked me up to monitors, gave me something to stop the contractions. It's stress, the obstetrician said. Your body is reacting to trauma. We're going to keep you overnight for observation. I lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines, and let myself finally fall apart. I cried for the marriage I'd lost, for the father my daughter would never know, for the life I'd been so sure of that had turned out to be built on lies. Why did he do it? I asked Grandma Patty, who'd refused to leave my side. What did I do wrong? Nothing. You did nothing wrong. She brushed hair back from my forehead like she used to when I was a child. Some people are just broken in ways we can't fix. David's weakness has nothing to do with your worth. But I didn't see it. I lived with him for 7 years, and I never saw it. Because you're not suspicious by nature. You trust people. That's not a flaw, Emma. That's what makes you good. She squeezed my hand. David spent years learning how to hide, how to manipulate, how to lie convincingly. You're not psychic. You're human. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you ignored every red flag? Every missed phone call explained away. Every late night at the office accepted without question. Every gut feeling dismissed as paranoia. Maybe you're thinking I was naive. Maybe I was. But I think most of us want to believe the best about the people we love. We want to trust that when someone says they love us, they mean it. The question is, when do you stop trusting them and start trusting yourself? The contractions eventually stopped. The doctor sent me home the next morning with orders to rest, avoid stress, and come back immediately if anything changed. Stress, as if I could avoid stress when my entire life was imploding. When I got home, there was a car in my driveway, a car I didn't recognize. Who is that? I asked my mother. We got out carefully. A woman emerged from the other car. She was young, blonde, pretty in a girl next door way. She looked terrified. Emma Carter? Her voice shook. Who are you? My name is Angela Morrison. I was one of the women in the photographs. Angela Morrison stood in my driveway wringing her hands, her eyes red from crying. She looked younger than she had in the photographs, maybe 27 or 28. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no makeup, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, she said, but I had to come. I had to tell you I'm sorry. My mother stepped between us protectively. I think you should leave. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Angela's voice broke. I didn't know he was married, not at first. By the time I found out, I was already in love with him. Something in her face reminded me of myself, the same devastation I'd felt sitting in that wicker chair while my world collapsed. She was a victim too, in her own way. Come inside, I said. Emma, are you sure? My mother looked worried, Ed. It's okay, Mom. I need to hear this. We sat in the living room, the same room where David and I had planned our future, chosen paint colors, talked about baby names. Angela perched on the edge of the couch like she might bolt at any second. I met David 2 years ago, she began, at a real estate conference in Atlanta. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had gotten the house and he was starting over. She twisted her hands in her lap. We dated for 6 months. He said he loved me. He said we were going to get married. When what happened? I asked. He ghosted me. One day we were planning a trip to Mexico. The next day he stopped answering my calls. I tried to find him. I even came to Charleston. That's when I saw him with you. Saw the ring on his finger. Realized he'd been lying about everything. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw the video. She pulled out her phone showing me a screen. It was a news article. The headline read, Local real estate developer's wife confronts mistress at baby shower. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation. Not the arrest, thankfully, but enough to make it newsworthy. Vanessa in her white dress, David's panicked face, Grandma Patty's calm authority. It's gone viral, Angela said. And when I saw it, I realized I wasn't the only one he'd lied to. I thought I was special. I thought what we had was real, but I was just another woman he used. Why tell me? Why not just move on? Because you deserve to know the truth, all of it. She took a deep breath. David doesn't love any of us. He loves what we can give him. I was working for a commercial real estate firm. I gave him insider information on properties before they went public. He made millions off deals I fed him. My stomach dropped. He used you for business information. And when I wasn't useful anymore, he threw me away. I'm guessing he did the same to the others. She looked at me with something like pity. What did he want from you? Money, I said quietly. My family's money. Then you were the big score. The rest of us were just practice. After Angela left, I sat alone in the silent house. My mother had gone to pick up groceries. Grandma Patty was at her lawyer's office, making sure all the paperwork was in order. I was alone with the ghosts of my marriage. I walked through the house David had designed, seeing it with new eyes. The expensive furniture we'd bought together, the art on the walls, the kitchen renovation that had cost $60,000. How much of it had been paid for with my money? How much of my inheritance had I unknowingly funded while he built his exit strategy? My phone rang, David's mother this time. Emma, dear, I just heard what happened. Her voice was careful, diplomatic. I want you to know that Barbara and I are mortified by David's behavior. Barbara was David's father. They were good people, conservative, traditional, the kind of people who went to church every Sunday and believed in marriage as a sacred institution. Thank you for calling, I said. But dear, I also want to suggest that perhaps everyone is being a bit hasty. David made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he's still the father of your child, perhaps with counseling. No. Emma, please think about the baby. She needs her father. She needs a father she can trust, a father who won't lie to her, a father who won't steal from her. My voice hardened. David is none of those things. You're angry, I understand, but anger fades. Family is forever. David stopped being family when he chose to betray me. I paused. I'm sorry, I know this hurts you too, but I can't protect his feelings anymore. I have to protect my daughter. I hung up before she could argue further. The next few days blurred together, lawyers and paperwork and phone calls. David tried to see me 3 times. Each time I had security to remove him from the property. He sent flowers with notes begging for forgiveness. I threw them in the trash. He had his parents call to plead his case. I stopped answering their calls. Grandma Patty kept me updated on the legal proceedings. The divorce was moving forward. The criminal charges were being prepared. David's assets were being frozen while investigators traced where my money had gone. He's desperate, Patty told me. His lawyer is pushing for a quick settlement. He knows if this goes to trial, he'll lose everything. What does he want? Joint custody of the baby, $50,000 to start over. And for you to drop the criminal charges. I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. Tell him I'll see him in court. 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3 in the morning to sharp pain across my abdomen. Not contractions. Something different. Something wrong. I called my mother. Something's wrong with the baby. She drove me to the hospital. They admitted me immediately, hooked me up to monitors. The obstetrician came in looking concerned. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. The baby's heart rate is irregular. We need to consider an emergency delivery. But it's too early. She's only 36 weeks. She'll be safer outside than in. The stress on your body is affecting her. The doctor squeezed my hand. We're going to do an emergency C-section. I know this isn't what you planned, but it's the safest option. Everything happened fast after that. Consent forms in operating rooms and bright lights. My mother holding my hand. Anesthesia making everything fuzzy. The pressure of the incision. The sudden cry of a baby. It's a girl, someone said. She's small, but she's breathing on her own. They held her up for me to see, tiny and red and perfect. Then they whisked her away to make sure her lungs were developed enough. I lay on the operating table being stitched back together and thought about how my daughter had entered the world early, fighting for breath, stronger than anyone expected, just like her mother would have to be. They brought her back an hour later, 4 pounds, 12 ounces, tiny but healthy. I held her against my chest and felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly, but a kind of fierce protectiveness that burned away everything else. What's her name? The nurse asked. I'd planned to name her Patricia after my grandmother. David and I had chosen it together months ago. But now, holding her, I realized she needed her own name, her own identity separate from his lies. Grace, I said. Her name is Grace. That's beautiful. What's the middle name? Patricia. Grace Patricia Carter. When Grandma Patty came to visit, she held Grace with tears streaming down her face. She's perfect, she whispered. Absolutely perfect. She's early because of the stress, because of everything with David. No, she's early because she's a fighter, because she knew you needed her. Patty looked up at me. You're going to be an amazing mother, Emma. I wasn't so sure. How could I be a good mother when I couldn't even trust my own judgment? I'd chosen David. I'd believed his lies. I'd built my entire life on a foundation that turned out to be sand. That night, alone in my hospital room with Grace sleeping in her bassinet beside me, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I heard you had the baby. Congratulations. I want to see her. I have rights as her father. David, I looked at my daughter, so small and innocent, and made a decision. I called Grandma Patty. I want you to file for full custody, no visitation, nothing. I want David completely out of our lives. Are you sure? That's a difficult case to win. He's a criminal. He's facing federal charges for fraud and embezzlement. No judge will give him custody. There was a pause. Then Patty said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned earlier. My blood went cold. What? The criminal charges, they might not stick. David's lawyer found a loophole. Most of the money he took was from joint accounts. Technically, he had legal access to it. The forgery charges are harder to prove without the original documents, which seem to have disappeared. What are you saying? I'm saying David might not go to prison. And if he doesn't, he could fight you for custody, and he might win. I sat in that hospital bed holding my newborn daughter and felt the world tilt again. Just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, the floor gave way beneath me. How? My voice came out as a whisper. How could he win custody? Grandma Patty's voice on the phone was careful. South Carolina law favors joint custody unless one parent can be proven unfit. David will argue that he's a successful businessman, that he has resources, that he wants to be involved in his daughter's life. And Emma, the affair doesn't legally make him an unfit parent. He's a thief. That we're having trouble proving in court. His lawyer is very good. He's already painted the offshore accounts as legitimate business investments. The forged signatures might have been mistakes in paperwork, not malicious intent. I looked at Grace sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. So small, so vulnerable. The thought of David taking her away from me, even for weekends, made my chest tight with panic. There has to be something we can do. There is. We document everything, every missed call, every threatening message. We build a case showing that he's unstable, that his presence would be harmful to Grace's well-being. Patty paused. But Emma, you need to prepare yourself. David has already filed for emergency custody. What? When? This morning, while you were in surgery. He's claiming that you're suffering from postpartum depression and are a danger to yourself and the baby. He has affidavits from his parents stating they're concerned about your mental state. I wanted to throw the phone. Instead, I held Grace tighter. That's a lie. I'm fine. I know that, but we need to prove it. I've already contacted a psychiatrist who can evaluate you. We'll need documentation from your obstetrician, from your therapist. I don't have a therapist. Then we'll get you one. Emma, I know this seems overwhelming, but we need to be strategic here. David is fighting dirty. And after we hung up, I sat in the dark watching Grace sleep. She made little snuffling noises, her tiny fists curled against her chest. She looked like me, I thought. Same nose, same chin. I couldn't see any of David in her at all. Maybe that was wishful thinking. A knock on the door made me jump. A nurse peeked in. Mrs. Carter, there's someone here to see you. A David Carter. He says he's the father. Tell him no. He's quite insistent. He says he has a legal right. Tell him I said no. Tell him if he doesn't leave immediately, I'll call security. The nurse nodded and disappeared. A few minutes later, I heard raised voices in the hallway, David arguing with someone. Then Grandma Patty's voice, sharp and commanding. The door opened and Patty came in, her face tight with anger. He's gone. I threatened to have him arrested for trespassing. He wants to take her from me. My voice broke. He wants to take Grace. He won't succeed, I promise you, Emma. I will not let that man take your daughter. She sat on the edge of my bed. But I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. More bad news? History. She took a deep breath. When your grandfather left me, I was pregnant. Your mother was 2 years old, and I was 3 months pregnant with a son. I stared at her. I'd never known she'd had another child. The stress of the divorce caused complications. I lost the baby at 5 months. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were haunted. Your grandfather didn't come to the hospital. He was already living with his mistress. When I tried to get custody of your mother, he fought me. He had better lawyers, more money, more connections. And back then, in the 70s, men like him always won. Grandma, I lost custody of my daughter for 2 years. 2 years of only seeing her on supervised visits because he convinced the judge I was hysterical, unstable. A woman scorned who couldn't be trusted with a child. She took my hand. I got her back eventually. I fought and clawed and used every legal tool I had until I proved he was unfit. But those 2 years destroyed me. Tears rolled down my cheeks. You never told me. Because it was the worst period of my life, and I didn't want to burden you with it. But now you need to know. You need to understand what men like David are capable of. She squeezed my hand hard. He will try to take Grace. He will use every weapon he has. He'll paint you as unstable, claim you're keeping his daughter from him out of spite. He'll play the victim. So what do I do? You be smarter. You be stronger. You document everything. You follow every rule perfectly. You make yourself unimpeachable in court. She looked at Grace. And you trust that I will never, ever let him take her from you. Not like I lost your uncle. Not like I almost lost your mother. The next morning, David's lawyer served me with custody papers while I was still in the hospital. According to the filing, David was requesting immediate joint custody with a plan to transition to 50-50 placement within 6 months. He claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I'd threatened him, that I was poisoning his daughter against him before she was even old enough to understand. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Clark that Grandma Patty had hired, read through the documents and shook her head. This is aggressive. He's not even giving you time to recover from surgery. Can he do this? Unfortunately, yes. We'll fight it, but you need to be prepared for a long battle. She looked at me seriously. Are you prepared for that? Because this is going to get ugly. I thought about my grandmother losing her son, fighting for years to get my mother back. The strength it must have taken to keep going when everything seemed lost. I'm prepared, I said. They discharged me from the hospital 2 days later. Grace was small but healthy enough to go home. My mother had set up the nursery, the one David had designed before everything fell apart. Looking at it made me nauseous, but Grace needed somewhere to sleep. The first night home was terrifying. Grace cried every 2 hours. I was exhausted from surgery, my incision burning every time I moved. My mother helped as much as she could, but that Grace only seemed to calm down when I held her. At 4 in the morning, both of us crying in the rocking chair, I had a moment of pure panic. What if David was right? What if I couldn't do this alone? What if Grace would be better off with 2 parents, even if one of them was a liar and a thief? Then Grace opened her eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw my answer in her tiny face. She didn't need David. She needed me, strong, whole, fighting for her. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, I did everything Jennifer and Grandma Patty told me to do. I went to therapy. I got cleared by my obstetrician. I documented every night Grace slept through, every milestone, every doctor's appointment. I created a paper trail showing that I was a capable, loving mother. David, meanwhile, was everywhere. He showed up at my house claiming he wanted to meet his daughter. Security turned him away. He sent gifts I returned. He had his parents call begging me to do the right thing. His lawyer painted him as a devoted father being kept from his child by a vindictive mother. My lawyer painted him as an unstable criminal, using his daughter as leverage to avoid prosecution. The judge would decide who was telling the truth. The night before the hearing, Grandma Patty sat with me on the couch while Grace slept upstairs. I want you to be prepared for what tomorrow might look like. I'm ready. David's going to lie. He's going to look the judge in the eye and paint himself as the victim. He's going to make you look like the villain. I know. And there's a chance the judge might believe him. There's a chance you might walk out of that courtroom with a custody arrangement you hate. My chest tightened. Are you trying to help? I'm trying to prepare you, because the one thing I learned through my own custody battle is that the legal system doesn't always get it right. Sometimes the villain wins. Sometimes good people lose their children to people who don't deserve them. She took my hand. But if that happens, you don't give up. You keep fighting, you appeal, you document, you wait for him to make a mistake, and then you use it against him. What if he doesn't make a mistake? Men like David always make mistakes. They can't help themselves. They're too arrogant to play it safe. She smiled grimly. We just have to be patient enough to wait for it. Have you ever been in a situation where everything you love is on the line? Where one person's decision could change your entire life? Where you're powerless to do anything except wait and hope and pray? That's what the next 24 hours felt like. I didn't sleep that night. I held Grace and memorized everything about her, the way she smelled like baby lotion and milk, the soft spot on her head where you could see her in her pulse, the tiny sounds she made in her sleep. If tomorrow went wrong, these might be my last moments alone with her. The next morning, I put on a conservative navy dress and pearl earrings. I looked like someone's respectable daughter, someone who went to church and baked cookies and would never do anything to harm her child. I looked like the person I used to be before David destroyed everything. The courthouse was cold and impersonal. We sat in a small family courtroom, not the grand courtrooms you see on TV. David sat across from me with his lawyer, and he looked good. Clean-cut, concerned, every inch the worried father. He'd always been a good liar. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses. She looked tired, like she'd heard too many sad stories and didn't believe anyone anymore. David's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of a man who'd made mistakes but was trying to make an amends. A father who wanted nothing more than to be part of his daughter's life. He showed photos of David building the nursery, picking out baby clothes, reading parenting books. Photos I'd never seen before. Photos that might have been staged specifically for this moment. Then it was my turn. Jennifer stood up and calmly destroyed David's narrative. She presented evidence of the affairs, the financial crimes, the lies. She showed emails where David had told Angela he was divorced, text messages where he'd told Vanessa he was going to leave me, bank statements showing the money he'd stolen. She called me to the stand. Mrs. Carter, how has your ex-husband's behavior affected your ability to care for your daughter? It hasn't, I said clearly. Grace is healthy and happy. She's gaining weight. She's meeting all her milestones. I love her more than anything in the world. And if the court awards joint custody, what are your concerns? That David will use Grace as leverage against me. That he'll disappear with her like he tried to disappear with my money. That he'll put his needs before hers, just like he put his needs before our marriage. David's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to make me seem hysterical or vindictive. Isn't it true that you've prevented Mr. Carter from seeing his daughter even once? I've protected my daughter from a man who can't be trusted. Isn't it true that you threatened to destroy his career if he fought for custody? I told him I would pursue criminal charges if he tried to take Grace from me. That's not a threat, so that's a consequence. When I stepped down, my legs were shaking. Grandma Patty squeezed my hand. David took the stand next. He cried, actually cried, talking about how much he loved his daughter, how he'd made mistakes, but he was a changed man, how all he wanted was a chance to be a father. It was a beautiful performance. The judge asked him directly, Mr. Carter, did you embezzle money from your wife's trust fund? No, Your Honor. Those were joint accounts. I had legal access to them. My wife and I made financial decisions together. She's now rewriting history to make herself look like a victim. It was a lie, but it was a lie he'd prepared well. And the affairs, the judge asked. I'm not proud of my actions. I was weak. I made terrible mistakes that destroyed my marriage. But being a bad husband doesn't make me a bad father. He looked directly at me. I love my daughter. I want to be part of her life. I'm begging the court to give me that chance. The judge called a 30-minute recess to review the evidence. Those were the longest 30 minutes of my life. We stood when the judge returned. Her face gave nothing away. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. This is a difficult case. On one hand, Mr. Carter's behavior toward his wife was deplorable. The affairs, the financial deception, all of it shows a pattern of dishonesty that concerns me greatly. David's lawyer started to smile. However, the judge continued, Mrs. Carter has not provided sufficient evidence that Mr. Carter poses a direct threat to the child's safety. The criminal charges are still pending. The financial issues are civil matters between the parties. And regardless of his failures as a husband, Mr. Carter has shown interest in being a father. My heart stopped. Therefore, I'm ordering supervised visitation to begin immediately. Mr. Carter will have 2 hours per week with his daughter, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. After 3 months, if the visits go well, we'll revisit the custody arrangement and consider expanding his time. Your Honor, Jennifer stood up. My client's daughter is only 3 weeks old. She's still nursing. This schedule will be extremely difficult. Then Mrs. Carter will need to pump. The child can take bottles during visits. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Carter, I understand your feelings toward your ex-husband, but barring evidence of abuse or neglect, I cannot deny a father access to his child. You will comply with this order or face contempt charges. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. David's lawyer was grinning now. Thank you, Your Honor. My client appreciates. I'm not finished. The judge turned to David. Mr. Carter, you are not to contact Mrs. Carter except through your lawyers or the visitation monitor. You are not to come to her home. You are not to call, text, or email her directly. Any violation of this order will result in immediate suspension of your visitation rights. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Carter, if I find out that you've used these visits to manipulate, threaten, or control Mrs. Carter in any way, I will not only suspend your rights, I will personally ensure that the prosecutor's office has every piece of evidence needed to pursue criminal charges against you. Am I clear? The smile slipped from his face. Yes, Your Honor. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, I couldn't breathe. David was going to be alone with Grace. Not truly alone. There would be a monitor, but still. He would hold her, feed her, have access to her. We'll appeal, Jennifer said immediately. This judge was too lenient. We can argue that Grace is too young for visitation away from her mother. How long will an appeal take, I asked. Months, maybe longer. In the meantime, you have to comply with the order. Grandma Patty put her arm around me. We knew this was a possibility. We prepared for it. How did we prepare for David being alone with my daughter? He won't hurt her. He wants custody, which means he needs to prove he's a good father. He'll be on his best behavior. And if he runs, if he takes her and disappears, the monitor will prevent that. And Emma, I hate to say this, but David needs money. He can't run without money. And I've frozen every account he had access to. He's trapped here just like we are. The first supervised visit was scheduled for the following week. I had to bring Grace to a neutral location, a family services office with a small room set up for visits. The monitor was a woman named Susan, kind-faced and professional. I handed Grace over to David and felt like I was handing over my heart. He held her awkwardly at first, like he'd never held a baby before. Susan showed him how to support her head, how to hold her bottle. I watched through a one-way mirror as he looked down at his daughter. For just a moment, I saw something real cross his face. Not manipulation or performance, just a father looking at his child. Then it was gone, and he was looking at the mirror where he knew I was watching, and his expression was triumphant. 2 hours felt like 2 years. When Susan brought Grace back, she was crying. She's just hungry, Susan said. She finished her bottle about 20 minutes ago. I took Grace and held her close, checking her for injuries I knew wouldn't be there. She was fine. Perfect. Unchanged by her time with her father. But I was changed. Something inside me had broken a little more. The visits continued weekly. David played the doting father role perfectly. He brought gifts. He took photos. He talked to Susan about his plans to set up a nursery in his new apartment. He's building a case, Jennifer warned me. Every visit is evidence for when he petitions for overnight stays. Can he do that? Eventually, yes. Once Grace is older and no longer nursing, the court will likely expand his time. You need to be prepared for that. How do you prepare to hand your child over to someone you don't trust? How do you sleep at night knowing that the person who destroyed your life now has legal access to the most important thing in it? I started having panic attacks. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, my heart racing, convinced something terrible was happening to Grace. I'd check the nursery 5, 6, 7 times a night just to make sure she was still breathing. My mother stayed with me most nights. Grandma Patty came by every day. My friends rallied around me, bringing food and offering to babysit. But nothing helped the crushing anxiety that David was slowly, methodically building a case to take Grace away from me. 6 weeks after the custody hearing, I was home alone with Grace when someone knocked on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw David standing there. I didn't open it. "Emma, I know you're in there," he called through the door. "I just want to talk, please. 5 minutes." "You're violating the court order," I called back. "You're not supposed to be here." "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just—" His voice cracked. "I just want to have a real conversation. Not through lawyers, not through Susan, just us." "No. Emma, please, I'm trying to make this right. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything. But I'm trying to be better. For Grace. Can't you see that?" I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You need to leave now or I'm calling the police. Why are you being so stubborn? Why can't you just forgive me and let us be a family? We're not a family. We'll never be a family again. Grace deserves 2 parents. Then you should have thought about that before you cheated on me with 5 different women and stole my inheritance." My voice was shaking but strong. "Leave now." He stood there for another minute. I could see him through the peephole, his face cycling through emotions. Anger, frustration, something that might have been actual regret. Then he turned and walked away. I called Jennifer immediately and sent her the recording. She called back 15 minutes later, thrilled. "This is exactly what we needed. He violated the court order. We can petition to suspend his visitation." Will it work? It's a strong violation. The judge was very clear about the no contact rule. I'll file the motion tomorrow. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Jennifer presented the recording, along with ring camera footage showing David at my door. The judge's expression grew darker as she watched. "Mr. Carter, what part of my order did you not understand?" the judge asked. David's lawyer stood up quickly. "Your Honor, my client was simply attempting to have a civil conversation about their daughter." A conversation I explicitly forbid him from having. The order was clear. No direct contact with Mrs. Carter except through attorneys or the monitor. The judge looked at David. "You violated that order within 6 weeks. That shows either a complete disregard for this court's authority or an inability to control yourself. Neither is acceptable." "Your Honor, I'm sorry," David said. "I made a mistake. I won't do it again." "You're right, you won't, because I'm suspending your visitation rights for 60 days. When that suspension is lifted, your visits will be reduced to 1 hour per week instead of 2. And if you violate any order from this court again, I will terminate your rights entirely. Do you understand?" David's face went white. "Your Honor, please, we're done here. This hearing is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, Jennifer actually hugged me. "This is huge, Emma. We just borrowed you time, and we showed that David can't follow rules. That's going to help when he inevitably tries to expand his custody." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. That night, lying in bed with Grace sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, I finally let myself cry. Not for David, not for what we'd lost, but for what Grace had lost. She would never know her father as anything but a man who'd been forced to visit her by court order. She would grow up with this shadow over her childhood, and it was my fault for choosing him. "It's not your fault," Grandma Patty said when I told her this the next day. "You didn't choose him knowing what he was. You chose the man he pretended to be. There's a difference." But I should have seen it. All the signs were there. "Emma, listen to me." She took my face in her hands. "I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years. I spent my entire career reading people, detecting lies, finding hidden truths, and even I didn't see through your grandfather until it was too late. Some people are just that good at lying. So what do I do? How do I trust myself again? You start by trusting that you did the best you could with the information you had. Then you forgive yourself for being human. She smiled sadly. And then you move forward. Because Grace needs a mother who's whole, not one who's broken by guilt. The 60 days without David felt like a gift. I started sleeping better. Grace grew and thrived without the disruption of visits. I went back to work part-time at the gallery, bringing Grace with me in a carrier. Life started to feel almost normal. Then Grandma Patty got sick. It started with a cough she couldn't shake, then fatigue, then a doctor's appointment that led to tests that led to a diagnosis I couldn't accept. Lung cancer, stage 4, spread to her lymph nodes and liver. How long? I asked the oncologist. With treatment, maybe a year. Without treatment, 6 months. Grandma Patty chose treatment. Not for herself, she told me, but for Grace. I want to see her walk. I want to hear her say her first word. I want a little more time. The chemotherapy was brutal. It took this strong, vibrant woman and hollowed her out. But she kept fighting. She came to every doctor's appointment with Grace, every milestone. She held Grace while I worked, singing her old songs in a voice that grew weaker each week. David's 60-day suspension ended, and the visits resumed, 1 hour per week. But now I had bigger things to worry about than David. I worried about my grandmother dying. 8 months after Grace was born, Grandma Patty sat me down and handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "A letter for when I'm gone." Her voice was hoarse from the chemo. "I want you to read it after." "Not now, after." "Grandma, you're not." "Emma, we both know I'm dying. Let's not pretend otherwise." She smiled, and it was the same sharp smile I'd known my whole life. "I've made peace with it. I've lived a good life. I've seen you strong and whole again. I've seen Grace start to grow. That's enough." "It's not enough for me." "I know, baby girl, but death doesn't care what's enough." She squeezed my hand. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let David win. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, don't let him take Grace from you. And don't let bitterness take you from yourself." "I promise." "And Emma, forgive yourself for trusting him, for not seeing the truth sooner, for being human. You deserve that forgiveness." Grandma Patty died 3 weeks later in the hospital with my mother and me holding her hands. Grace was with a babysitter. I'm glad she didn't have to see it. The funeral was small. Grandma Patty had requested no fuss, just a simple service and cremation. Her ashes were scattered in the ocean, where she'd always felt most at peace. I held the sealed envelope she'd given me, but couldn't bring myself to open it. Not yet. The grief was too fresh. David came to the funeral. He stood in the back, didn't speak to me, but I felt his presence like a storm cloud. After the service, his lawyer called Jennifer. "Mr. Carter would like to request expanded visitation now that Mrs. Carter's grandmother has passed. He feels she'll need support during this difficult time, and he'd like to provide that support by caring for Grace more frequently." I wanted to scream. My grandmother had been dead for 3 days, and David was already using it as leverage. "Absolutely not," Jennifer told him. "My client is grieving and needs stability, not more disruption." But the request was filed anyway. Another court date was scheduled. 2 weeks after the funeral, I finally opened Grandma Patty's letter. The envelope was thick. Inside were several handwritten pages in her precise, elegant script. I sat on the porch where I'd sat so many times with her, watching Grace play in the grass, and began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you're not wasting time being bitter about David. Here's the truth I learned too late. Revenge doesn't heal you. Forgiving yourself does. I spent 40 years angry at your grandfather. 40 years holding on to rage like it was armor. And you know what? He didn't care. He was off living his life, married to his mistress, happy in his selfishness. I was the one in prison. A prison I built myself out of anger and hurt and pride. Don't make my mistake, Emma. I'm not saying forgive David. That's between you and whatever higher power you believe in. I'm saying forgive yourself. For trusting him, for not seeing the warning signs, for believing that love could overcome his weakness. You did nothing wrong except be human. Here's what I've learned in my 78 years. Some people are just broken in ways we can't fix. David's brokenness isn't your fault. It's not your job to heal him or save him or even understand him. Your job is to protect Grace and build a life that's so strong, so good, so completely yours that he can't touch it. And here's the secret, sweetheart. You're already doing it. I've watched you these past months. I've seen you hold Grace while your world was falling apart. I've seen you stand in court and fight for your daughter with everything you have. I've seen you rebuild yourself going from nothing into someone even stronger than before. That's the real gift I'm leaving you. Not the legal protections or the money or the evidence I gathered. Those were just tools. The real gift is knowing that you're capable of surviving the worst thing you can imagine. You've already done it. You've already won. So here's what I need you to do. Let David have his visits. Let the courts decide whatever they decide. But don't let any of it steal your peace. Because Grace needs a mother who's present, not one who's consumed by fighting battles that don't matter. David is not the enemy. Fear is. Bitterness is. The voice in your head that says you're not strong enough, smart enough, good enough to do this alone. That voice is a liar. You are enough. You always were. You just needed to believe it. Raise Grace to be brave. Raise her to trust her instincts. Raise her to know that a woman's worth isn't determined by the man beside her, but by the strength inside her. And when she asks about her father someday, tell her the truth. Tell her he was weak, but she doesn't have to be. I love you more than words can say. I'm so proud of the woman you have become. And I'll be with you always, in every strong choice you make, in every moment you choose yourself over fear. Build something beautiful, Emma. Build something he can never touch. All my love, Grandma Patty Wenches. The trust fund I set up for Grace is in your name only. David has no access. The house is yours free and clear. The gallery is yours. Everything I built to make sure you and Grace would always be safe. Use it well. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Grandma Patty was right. I'd been so focused on fighting David that I'd forgotten to live. The next court date came. David's lawyer argued for expanded visitation. Jennifer argued against it. The judge listened to both sides and then surprised everyone. I'm going to order a family evaluation. A court-appointed psychologist will meet with both parents, observe visitation, and make recommendations about custody. I'll base my final ruling on that evaluation. 3 months. 3 months of having a stranger observe every interaction with Grace, every decision I made, every moment of my parenting scrutinized and judged. David looked pleased. He thought this was his chance to prove himself. But I remembered Grandma Patty's words, build something beautiful, build something he can never touch. I stopped fighting the evaluation and started showing them who I really was. A mother who loved her daughter, a woman rebuilding her life with grace and strength, someone who didn't need a man to be whole. The psychologist met with me 6 times, watched me with Grace, interviewed my friends and family, observed David's visits. The report came back 4 months later. Jennifer called me with the results before they were filed with the court. Emma, you need to sit down. Is it bad? It's complicated. She paused. The psychologist recommends continued 1-hour weekly supervised visits for David. No expansion of custody at this time. Relief flooded through him. That's good news. There's more. The report notes that David shows signs of narcissistic personality disorder, that he uses Grace as a tool to maintain contact with you, that his interest in custody seems more about controlling you than bonding with Grace. So he can't get more time? Not unless he completes therapy and shows significant behavioral changes, which the psychologist believes is unlikely. Jennifer's voice softened. Emma, you won. Not just this round, you won. I hung up and sat on the floor holding Grace in my lap. She was almost a year old now, starting to pull herself up on furniture, babbling mama and dada indiscriminately, growing so fast. We're safe, I whispered to her. We're finally safe. The court accepted the psychologist's recommendations. David's visits stayed at 1 hour per week, supervised. He was ordered to complete therapy before any expansion would be considered. 6 months later, he stopped attending visits regularly, then stopped altogether. His lawyer called to say David was focusing on rebuilding his business and would reconnect with his daughter when the time was right. Translation, he'd given up. The fight was too hard, the rewards too small. I'd called his bluff. Grace's first birthday party was small and perfect. Just family and close friends. My mother made a cake shaped like a flower. Grace smashed it with both hands, getting frosting everywhere, and everyone laughed. David didn't call, didn't send a gift, didn't acknowledge the day at all. I took a photo of Grace covered in cake and icing, sent it to him with a simple message. Your daughter's first birthday. You missed it. He never responded. Life settled into a new normal. I expanded my hours at the gallery. Grace thrived at daycare, making friends, learning to walk, becoming her own little person. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. I was learning to be happy alone. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from David's lawyer. David wanted to terminate his parental rights. No more visits, no more child support obligations. He wanted to walk away completely. What do I do? I asked Jennifer. Do you want him in Grace's life? I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I want Grace to grow up knowing her father? Or did I want to protect her from the disappointment of a father who couldn't be bothered to show up? I want what's best for Grace. Then ask yourself, is David what's best for Grace? The answer was easy. No. I signed the papers agreeing to termination of parental rights. David signed them the same day. Just like that, he was gone from our lives legally and completely. Grace was too young to understand. Someday she'd ask about her father. Someday I'd have to tell her the truth. But not today. Today she was mine. Only mine. Safe and loved and whole. I took the letter Grandma Patty had written and framed it. It hung in my bedroom where I could see it every day. A reminder of everything she'd taught me. Everything she'd sacrificed to protect me. Build something beautiful. Build something he can never touch. I did. The gallery expanded. I bought a second location. Started representing emerging artists. Built a reputation as someone who took chances on talent others overlooked. Grace grew. 3 years old, then 4. She was smart and funny and completely fearless. She looked like me, but had her own spirit. When she asked about her daddy, I told her the truth in words she could understand. Your daddy wasn't ready to be a daddy, so he left. But that's okay because you have me and Grandma and Uncle James and so many people who love you. Do you miss him? She asked once. I miss who I thought he was, but I don't miss who he really was. What's the difference? How do you explain that to a 4-year-old, Dimao? How do you explain that sometimes people wear masks and you fall in love with the mask, and when it comes off, you're left with a stranger? The difference is that the person I thought he was would never have left you, but the person he really was couldn't stay. I pulled her close. But that's his loss, not yours, because you're amazing. She thought about this seriously. Then, can we have ice cream? And just like that, the heavy conversation was over. Because she was 4 and resilient and didn't carry the scars I carried. Maybe that was enough. 5 years after Grace was born, I met someone. His name was James. He was an art professor at the college. He came to one of my gallery openings and we talked for 3 hours about color theory and the intersection of art and emotion. He asked me to coffee, then dinner. Then he met Grace. He was patient with her, kind. He never tried to be her father, just a friend who happened to care about her mother. I have a lot of baggage, I told him on our 10th date. Everyone has baggage. The question is whether you've unpacked it or you're still carrying it around. I'm working on unpacking it. That's all anyone can do. James didn't propose. We didn't get married, but he moved in after 2 years of dating, and we built something neither of us had to call by any particular name. We were just us, figuring it out as we went. Grace called him Uncle James, sometimes just James. Once, when she was 6, she asked if she could call him Dad. That's up to you, he said gently. But I want you to know that I'm honored either way. You're an amazing kid, and I'm lucky to be part of your life. She thought about it and decided on James. Because you're James. You don't have to be my dad to be important. Out of the mouths of babes. 7 years after the baby shower that destroyed my marriage and saved my life, I sat on my porch watching Grace play in the yard. She was 7 now, long-legged and confident. She wanted to be an artist when she grew up, or a veterinarian, or maybe both. The house was different than it had been. I'd remodeled after the divorce, erasing David's design choices. New paint, new furniture, new memories built in rooms that used to echo with old pain. James was inside making dinner. Grace was creating an elaborate chalk drawing on the driveway. Life was ordinary in the best possible way. My phone buzzed with a notification, a friend request on social media from someone I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, then saw the mutual friend, Angela Morrison. I accepted and sent a message. "How are you?" She responded within minutes. "Good, better. I went back to school, getting my real estate license. Figured I'd learn how to actually do the business instead of just feeding info to men who don't deserve it." We chatted for a while. She'd moved to Atlanta, started dating someone who actually respected her, learned to trust her instincts again. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked. "Sometimes, usually when Grace asked questions about her father, but mostly no. He's just someone I used to know." I saw his profile the other day. He got remarried, already divorced again. Good for him, or not, I don't really care either way. And I realized as I typed it that it was true. I didn't care. David was just a chapter in my story, an important one that taught me valuable lessons. But not the whole story. The whole story was Grace giggling as she drew flowers in chalk, James calling us for dinner, my gallery opening featuring a new artist tomorrow night, the life I'd built from the ashes of the old one. Grace ran up to the porch covered in chalk dust. "Mama, look what I made." I looked at her drawing. It was a house with a family in front. A mom, a girl, and a man labeled James, no one else. Just the people who showed up, who stayed, who chose us every day. "It's perfect," I said. "James says dinner's ready. He made my favorite." She ran inside, tracking chalk dust everywhere, and I didn't even care. I pulled out my phone and looked at an old photo I'd saved, the one from the baby shower, the before photo. Me in my blue dress, smiling at the camera, one hand on my pregnant belly, believing everything was perfect. I looked different in that photo, softer, more naive, less strong. I preferred who I was now. I deleted the photo and put my phone away. Some things don't need to be saved. Grace called from inside. "Mama, come on! It's getting cold." I stood up and walked toward the house, toward the family I'd chosen, toward the life I'd built, toward the future that was mine and mine alone. Behind me, the sun was setting over Charleston, the same view I'd looked at 7 years ago when my world was falling apart. But now it just looked like home. Grandma Patty had been right about everything. Revenge didn't heal me. Forgiving myself did. Building something beautiful did. Choosing to be strong did. Inside, James had set the table. Grace was already seated, telling him about her day. I sat down and looked at them. My family. Not the family I'd planned, but the family I'd been given. The family I'd fought for. "Everything okay?" James asked, reading my expression. "Everything's perfect." And it was. Not perfect in the way fairy tales are perfect, but perfect in the way real life is perfect. Messy and complicated and beautiful and mine. We ate dinner. We cleaned up together. We put Grace to bed, too. We sat on the couch and watched a movie and just existed in the same space without drama or chaos or fear. Later, lying in bed, I thought about that baby shower 7 years ago, about Vanessa in her white dress, about Grandma Patty's gift that changed everything, about David running away while everyone applauded. If I could go back and tell that pregnant, heartbroken woman on the porch one thing, what would I say? I'd tell her, "You're going to be okay, better than okay. You're going to be happy. It won't happen overnight. It'll take years of fighting and healing and learning to trust yourself again. But you'll get there. And when you do, you'll realize that the worst day of your life was actually the day you got free." I'd tell her, "Hold on, keep fighting. Trust your grandmother. Trust yourself. And when you're standing on the other side of this, you'll understand that some things have to fall apart, so better things can fall together." I'd tell her, "Grace is going to be amazing. James is going to be kind. Life is going to surprise you in the best ways possible." But most of all, I'd tell her what Grandma Patty told me. Build something beautiful. Build something he can never touch, because that's exactly what I did. And it was worth every painful step. Outside my window, Charleston slept, Grace slept, James slept, and for the first time in 7 years, I slept peacefully too. No nightmares about custody battles, no anxiety about money, no fear about the future, just peace. Just the quiet knowledge that I'd survived the worst and come out stronger. Just gratitude for the grandmother who'd seen what I couldn't see and protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Just love for the daughter who'd given me a reason to keep fighting. Just hope for whatever came next. The mistress had shown up at my baby shower to mock me. She'd come to tear me down, to take what was mine, to prove that I wasn't enough. But Grandma's gift had left her speechless, had exposed the lies, had saved me from a man who would have destroyed me. And now, years later, I understood that the real gift wasn't the evidence or the legal protections or the money. The real gift was the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I was enough, all by myself. That was the gift that changed everything, and I would carry it with me forever.